Welcome, everybody. Thank you for participating in the lodging conference. You know, each and every year, this is one of the events that I look forward to the most. The weather is always great. And as you saw in those photos just a moment ago, the people are what make the difference. I particularly love that photo of the folks playing golf and jumping in the air. And, you know, as we've all suffered through this global pandemic now going on 10 months, you know, I think we justifiably so yearn for days like that. But I think all of society, everyone wants to get back to those days. And hopefully 2021 is the start of that. Look, we are entering into a new year, and with it, a lot of new promise of things that could be much better than last year. But we also recognize that we are still in the midst of really a life-altering event, a global event that is rare that anyone would experience in their lifetime, something that changes us and changes what we do and changes our industry in ways that are permanent. And today we've been able to gather some of the true experts, and I'll introduce them in just a few minutes to talk about that. But it is against this backdrop of probably the most difficult year that our industry has ever faced, one of the most difficult years that humankind has ever faced, that we now move into a new year full of promise, opportunities that we see ahead of us, especially with vaccine distribution and thoughts of better days ahead. But how long will that take? What will those days look like? How many of us will make it from here to there? Those are all topics that we're going to discuss today. And again, thank you for being with us. I just absolutely love the lodging conference. I so much wish we could do this in person and cannot wait until we can do it in person. With that, I want to turn it over before we go to the panel to Rod Clough from HVS for some opening remarks. Rod?
Thanks, Chip. Great intro. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a nice, large group here listening in, which is fantastic. Pleased to co-sponsor this with the Lodging Conference. It's been great working with everybody to get this going. So we'll go to my first slide here. We've updated our outlook for the lodging industry, and you can see the HVS forecast for occupancy, average rate, and RevPAR there for the next 4 years, including how things about finished off in 2020. You'll see that this year we're expecting about 11.5 point increase in occupancy. And the majority of that increase is going to come in the late summer and fall months. So as we progress through these first few months of the year and things still remain pretty well on the low side, that's to be expected. We'll really see the increase happen in the latter half of the year. That'll be followed up by a 7.5 point or so increase in 2022. That increase will come from the early months of the year that we're going to have to suffer through here in 2021 and 2022. Those will look a lot better. So we'll see that bump up then. And then we're really back occupancy wise in 2023 overall, we see with a bit of an uptick in 2024. But really two big years of gains occupancy wise. For the average rate side, we see things lagging a bit, taking a little bit more time to have average rate come back. We see about a $6 gain this year. Coming out of the pandemic, getting things going again, getting some discounts in place for the fall to really get that, incentivize that business to come back, the group discounts that might be necessary and so on. We don't really see that group, the rate momentum coming back until 2022, 2023, a $10 increase in 22 and an $8 increase in 23. Followed then by a $6 increase in 24. So we see that rate exceeding that 2019 level of 131 by 2024. And really the transient will come back the fastest, and we expect to see that full force of group business back in place by 2023. So this morning, I was just thinking Like how is this, how can this all happen? And on what pace can this possibly happen by? I was seeing numbers on the news now about how many doses have been administered, and we're at about 10.8 million. And so I put together this graph, and it's really not an opinion of HVS. These numbers are just really a what if. So what you're looking at here is the light blue top of this color graph represents all of the vaccinations for the entire US population that would need to be given out. So it's the 328 million times 2. The dark blue bar is what if 60% of the population ultimately wants to get vaccinated. And that's certainly who knows what kind of a number that might be. It might be 65, it might be 65. So ultimately, if we say 60% vaccinated, and then the green is a potential pace of vaccinations. So if you look back at where we are today, which is, and I'm going to spend a little more time on that slide. I'm sorry. I'll go through the other slides much faster. I promise. So where we are right now on the 14th, you can see that it's a little bit depressing because we have so much green ahead of us, right? But we're starting to pace up. I think yesterday we were up to 1.3 or 1.4 million doses given just yesterday. But if we can get up to the $2.9 million mark on a daily basis, then we could see that 60% being vaccinated by mid-June. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If we can't get up to the 2.9, it's going to take longer. If more than 60% want to be vaccinated, it's going to take longer. But if this were to come true, we'd be looking at mid-June for having that vaccination in place. So I just thought that was interesting to throw out there. Not necessarily going to happen that way. This is our forecast of what the monthly scenario might look like in 2021. The latter half of that chart, you can see how we're seeing the occupancy really coming back in the latter half of the year, the dip not being quite as significant in April and May as we experienced in 2020. And you can see how the blue line of 2019 compares against that, and how we're getting closer to that blue line in 2021, but not quite there yet. Same with that average rate, not a lot of growth in average rate first half of the year. Things are looking better in the second half of the year. Just a couple things I want to point out on this next slide, and these slides will be available to the participants of this seminar. You'll see that on the top end of this graph, occupancy for the economy hotels and ADR for that matter have been the least affected. Still some effect there. This is on a running 28 days. So you can see that even where we are today for the last month in this pandemic, the economy is still continuing to hold. What I also wanted to point out in this slide, which is easy to miss, is the luxury ADR is not declining as much as you think it might. It would. It's only at 8.9, and if you look at the daily trends provided by STR, luxury is holding rate relative to where things were last year. So big occupancy decline, obviously, for luxury. But once that occupancy comes back, because that rate hasn't been devastated and they're holding that rate, that might be an upside point to look at for luxury recovery. And I'm going through these kind of quick, but I have limited time with you guys. So for the transaction market, not surprisingly, super low transactions right now. We're not seeing a lot of activity. The PPP funding that's come out and relaxed forbearance rules are really delaying foreclosures. Once this market really starts returning summer, fall, it may negate the need for foreclosure at all. So that's something that we're looking at and monitoring. The seller's ability to, if a transaction is going to occur in this kind of a market, the seller has to be willing to take that cut. price, where things may have been in 2019. Today, it may be 20 or 25% discount. Can a buyer obtain financing? And also, if they are able to retain financing, the lender really wants to see that hotel's turned the corner, or it's in a market or a location that hasn't been as deeply affected by the pandemic. I did a study last fall of comparing where our values were in the months of July through September, October, versus hotels that we appraised in the 2017 to 2019 timeframe. Of the 1,000 engagements we had done at that time since the pandemic began, we had about 150 that we had reappraised. And this graph shows you what the difference in value was between the prior work and the 2020 work. And you can see that there's quite a range there. But the predominance is in that -10 to -35% range. And as time goes on, I mean, this is really in the thick of it, the thick of the decline. As we get closer and closer to having these vaccinations administered, we'll start to see this graph move closer to the zero, start to see some positive gains, a lot less in the -30 to 35 range. It may be closer to the 0 to the -20. And then as we fully come out of it, these days will be behind us. All right. Final thoughts here before I hand it back to Chip. Robust occupancy recovery we see coming in the summer and fall, followed by first half of 2022 recovery. ADR is going to lag a little bit. We'll see the robust ADR growth in 2022 and 2023. Transaction volume, we're expecting to come back come fall, once we're able to really document that NOI recovery. And meetings business, we really do see coming back. I see the lodging conference selling out, like you may want to register early. People are anxious to meet. What this has taught us is that we are a society that likes to meet in person. I think we're all sick of the Zoom meetings. So surveys are showing that meetings business is expected to come back. It may take a couple years, but it will come back strong. And finally, high increases in construction costs, going to keep some new construction, new openings at bay. Those costs just, even in the pandemic, keep going up and up. And still a lot of folks interested in buying hotels, just not enough sellers, I think, willing to make those price cuts. But sellers buyers are out there and interested. And that's it. So a lot to get through there, Chip.
Right. Thank you so much. That was some great information. You know, I think what's really interesting in that is, as you look at those numbers, what Rod and CVS and so many others or HVS, I'm sorry, CVS. I'm thinking getting your vaccine, right? What Rod at HVS and others are telling us is, by the time we have another presidential election, we'll be back to where we were. So if you want to put it in that historical perspective, 2024 appears to be the year that we'll be back fully to where we were, but we certainly hope it happens quicker than that. So Rod, thanks again for your information and all that HVS does. I want to thank Harry Javer, who, as you know, runs the lodging conference, and his entire team, who are just wonderful. One of the really good things about getting to be a host and moderate these panels, that after a while, people come to you and they ask you, hey, who do you want to be on your panel? And so that gives me the opportunity to go out and ask my best friends in the industry, which I've done here, to join me today. Now, the reason you're lucky is that my best friends in the industry also happen to be the smartest people in the industry. And so I'm going to introduce them right now. Most of them need no introduction. If you don't know these folks, then you probably don't know our industry very well. But I will introduce them quickly, and we're going to jump right into the questions. And the way we're going to handle this is I'm going to put a question on the table and ask somebody to start, but we're going to go back and forth, and folks are going to jump in with their opinions. And on some questions, maybe they don't have an opinion, but we're going to get through as much as we can, as quickly as we can. We have Geoff Balloti, the CEO of Wyndham Hotels, with us. Dave Johnson, the CEO of Aimbridge Hospitality. Justin Knight, CEO of AAHOA Hospitality REIT. My dear friend Biran Patel, the chairman of AAHOA, and Heather McCrory, the CEO for North and Central America for Accor Hotels. Thank you so much for being with us today. I suspect you're all scattered across the globe. I'm actually sitting in my office here, as you can probably tell, in Washington, D.C., where it is weird. When you walk the streets, there's military everywhere, there are barricades everywhere, and that is all set up for the inauguration that's going to happen here in a few days. The weather is beautiful, but there's nobody on the streets outside right now other than military and law enforcement getting ready for a new president, a new administration, and now we're starting a new year. And as we start this year, I would love to get your thoughts, because this is kind of a view from the top discussion. Get your thoughts on what scares you about 2021 and what opportunities do you see? What excites you about 2021? I'll start with my dear friend, Geoff Balloti. Geoff?
Wow. Thanks, Chip. There's so much, if we just listen to Rod, that I think excites us all about 2021. I mean, the longest running upcycle has just ended. And Rod and STR and so many in our industry are predicting really record comeback in terms of first leisure transient in the second half of this year. And I think we're already seeing that. I mean, we just have to look to last week's STR report, which was the first clean week of occupancy and RevPAR that we've seen all year. December was better than November, despite all the rising caseloads. And to see economy occupancy already ahead of last week, is something that certainly excites me. And I agree with everything that Rod said. I do think travel is going to be coming back, and I think all of us on this panel probably believe that.
Heather, what about you? What scares you? What excites you about 2021?
So what excites me, and I'm actually very much like Geoff, I'm very bullish about 2021. I'm very hopeful that it's going to come in the way that everybody's predicting it will. And I guess what scares me the most and what worries me, keeps me awake at night, would be that it doesn't. We've gone through a tough year in 2020 is all. I don't need to go on about it. And we need some relief. And so the market coming back, things settling down, my biggest worry is that just won't happen as quickly as we need it to. But I actually do believe we're in a good place to move that forward.
Dave Johnson, what would excite me is if I were with you wherever you are right now, because that looks gorgeous. But Dave, what excites you? What scares you? You guys have done amazing things even during the pandemic.
Oh, thanks, Chip. I mean, we all took it on the chin in 2020. I probably, I'm always the guy that's typically the glass overflowing, but I'm a little more bearish on 2021 than I think many of my colleagues are. I honestly think, and I agree with Rod's comments, I don't think healthy people are going to get the vaccine until probably, late summer, early fall. And I for one, believe there's going to be a kind of a waiting, quiet time. People are going to want to see infection rates go down. They're going to want to see mortality rate decline. And I think it's going to be this kind of, is it okay to put my toe in the water? So I'm kind of saying 2021 is going to be a little bit more of a transition year. That obviously depends on what asset class you're in the hospitality. Your urban obviously is going to trail the recovery. But I'm probably one of the most bullish on 2022 and beyond. I agree with Rod. I am sick of Zoom calls, interaction. Chip, you and I have done a few of these, but I think we're just itching. We saw it a little bit in leisure. The whole country was locked down in the second quarter, and we saw it in the summer, and I think all of our assets, leisure came back. People just want to get out of the house, and you can social distance on a golf course or on a beach, hiking in Colorado, and we saw it there. But I'm a broken record, Chip. The thing that scares me the most is we need Congress to pass this release of liability. I've talked to CEOs of major, I won't name them, but top 100 corporations, and they're saying, we're not going to say this publicly, but we will not put our people back on the road until we get that release of liability. So, I know you and your team have been working dramatically, but I just think the correlation between that legislation being passed and business travel is going to be huge. So thanks to you in advance of all your efforts and anything we can do to help. But I really feel like we need to get that issue at the forefront to get companies back to saying, hey, it's time to travel and do business.
I definitely want to talk about liability in just a minute and clearly advocacy, but I wanted to get your perspective real quick, Dave, before I go to the ownership perspective of Biran and Justin. You were at, like you just mentioned a moment ago, you were at a major event just last week, college football national championship game. And by the way, what a performance by one of the all-time great teams in Alabama. But did you feel safe? Did you feel like that an event venue I guess it's now Hard Rock Stadium, that they did a good job of making sure everyone felt safe?
Chip, great question. I thought they did an outstanding job. You know, we have it a little bit different down here in Texas than some of the northern cities, but, you know, I went to a few Cowboy games. I was fortunate to be in a suite, but they limit the suite to 50% capacity. You know, the testing in and out is incredible, but obviously I think they only had 15% capacity, so it was a little weird. But as far as, you know, my feeling safe, you know, masks in, masks out until you get to your seat, I thought they did a fantastic job.
Well, perfect segue to another Cowboys fan, Biran Patel. You're an owner. You deal with this yourself, but you also, as chair of AAHOA, deal with thousands of other owners. What's your feeling? 2021, are you excited about it? Scared? What's up?
I'm a little bit like Dave. You know, one of the biggest concerns that I have for hotel owners is the ADR. You know, depending where, you know, what industry segment you're in and what type of hotels you own, you know, we've taken a hit probably to maybe about 15 years where our ADR has gone back. And so, you know, another thing that worries me is the return of corporate travelers. You know, hopefully that the trend of online meetings is not somewhat permanent. You know, as you know, some of my fellow panelists mentioned, you know, the vaccine gives us some optimism, but as Rod mentioned earlier, how is that going to be distributed? And if the distribution is delayed, then can that, you know, impede on the economic recovery? I mean, you know, the stock market is somewhat back, so that gives us some hope. The PPP that has been addressed here in the last couple of weeks, that gives me hope also. But, you know, just for the corporate travel to be back, and I mean, it's just, we just don't know yet.
Justin, I know we talk all the time, and thank you for your service as an officer at AHLA. You know, you're dealing with this at the retail level as an owner. What are you seeing? Are you scared, excited? Where are you?
Somewhere probably in between. When you ask what we have to worry about, there are more options, I think, this year to choose from than there are in ordinary years. And coming into this year, I really felt that the virus would be the only thing to worry about. And I think that the beginning of this year has proven that there might be a few other things to keep our eyes on. In terms of optimism, I think there's no doubt there's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand, both on the leisure and on the business side. You know, I think what's been highlighted by your other participants and Rod touched on earlier is, you know, there will be, you know, stages of this recovery. And really, I think how you feel the recovery will depend a lot on where you are. Our expectation, I think, and Dave hit on this earlier, is that the group's going to be a little bit slower to come back. And for individuals who have hotels that are highly dependent on group, or, you know, have hotels in markets that are highly dependent on group, the timing of their recovery may vary from people who have hotels in leisure destinations, which really I anticipate will do incredibly well over the summer. What we've seen on the leisure side is incredibly positive. And I think the conversations that we're having with our business accounts are positive as well. We just need the vaccine, and we need some protection for employers, so that we can really free up that demand and get back to occupancy levels that can support our hotels and our industry.
Justin, let me stay with you quickly. You know, Geoff pointed out a moment ago, Rod talked about it. We've been on a 10-year run, and you know, when you're on a 10-year run, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If things are staying constant, and for our industry getting better over 10 years, you kind of fall into a system. You know what you're doing. I shouldn't say it becomes easy, but it certainly becomes routine. Now you have this major global disruptor that changes our lives. How are you now operating differently, and how will you operate differently compared to the past decade?
That's a great question. We actually, we thought we were doing everything we could do to manage margins at our hotels. And really, I think if you look at how the recovery had happened, rate and occupancy had kind of stabilized towards the latter part of it. And we were seeing cost pressures. We were working on productivity. We were looking really at our model, we thought holistically, looking to gain additional efficiencies and still provide our guests with the value that they were looking for. I think in the pandemic, we've started from scratch, as have a lot of other ownership and management groups, looking at every aspect of our business, looking at how people perform various tasks at the hotel level, and really questioning again, what are the things that we offer that have the greatest value to our guests? And I think the result in the short term has been a significant modification of the way we run our business. And you know, some of that's dictated by the environment that we're in, but there have been learnings in that process that I think will help us as we move forward and begin to gain back occupancy and rate, to operate better, you know, to more efficiently provide the services and amenities that our guests most value. And you know, I think that bodes well for the future of our industry from a profitability standpoint and really from an attractiveness to our guests.
Dave, you obviously run a management company that touches not just the U.S., but now all around the globe. How just that alone, the growth that you've seen and the changes that have happened at Aimbridge, the merger with Interstate, that alone obviously caused you to change how you guys operate. But how are you changing that moving forward compared to the last 10 years of the way you did business?
Question, Chip. I'll tell you, Europe's tough. Geoff can probably relate to that. I mean, the shutdown there, and again, I think we look at this pandemic, sometimes we're all in the same boat, and, you know, our properties in Florida, you know, in Texas, the southern states tend to perform a little bit better. Northern cities are tough, and in Europe, to your point, in most of the countries over in that part of the world, it's basically shut down, you know, so we still have quite a few hotels that are shut down. And you know, one of the things, Chip, that, you know, once in a while I get lucky and I make good decisions, but probably about 6 years ago, you know, I really saw an opportunity. You know, the management business is very fragmented, and there's, as you know, thousands of management companies out there. There was really nobody that really had scale. And we collectively made a huge bet on scale, basically to be able to go out and do, you know, a few what I call pretty simple things. But one was, you know, scale drives margin. You know, we have the ability that we buy more. And, you know, somebody reminded me the other day that, you know, we're the third largest hotel company in the world. We always call ourselves the largest third-party management company, but, you know, we're behind Accor and Marriott in number of hotels and rooms managed across the globe. So, you know, guys like Justin, who we have the privilege of managing assets for, you know, each and every day we work on behalf of the owner. You know, we want to be great brand partners, you know, with guys like Geoff. But at the end of the day, you know, we work for Justin and a lot of his peers, and our jobs need to drive margins. So we want to have great service for our guests. So our scale in and of itself has allowed us to bring down margins, you know, bring down costs on things like insurance, benefits, et cetera, that we buy, obviously from a procurement standpoint. And then obviously we become employer of choice. You know, I was always frustrated in the management business when I was small that you'd hire a young Chip, and he'd do a great job for 2 years, and then he'd raise his hand and say, I want to make more money and I want more responsibility. And we didn't have anything to give him. So, you know, it was unfortunate. Chip had to go across the street and work for a competitor. Now we've got folks that, you know, they're on their 5th and 6th and 7th roles with us in Aimbridge. And, you know, we're basically a place where a lot of great people, and as we all know in this industry, we're all about our general managers, our directors of sales out there in the field. If we've got great talent, we're going to have great outcome at our properties. So, but I think going back to Justin's point earlier, we had to kind of reinvent the wheel. I think we all going into the pandemic felt like, you know, we had tightened everything down. We were operating in a great environment. And the only thing I'll say on a negative, and this is more of a consumer, I won't mention any names, but, you know, I've been to some really nice resorts here over the last 4 or 5 months. And one of the things I want to caution our industry on is that, you know, I think some of us are using the pandemic as an excuse to deliver poor service. You know, I've been in New York City twice. I've stayed in DC in assets that any of us would be very proud to stay in. And I just caution us as an industry that to not take for granted how important service is to our guests. And to Biran's point earlier, the way for us to drive average rate is obviously deliver an incredible experience for our guests.
I want to go to Heather and Geoff real quick and then back to Biran. But Heather and Geoff, obviously you face the economic pressures of not just obviously when running a global brand appealing to consumers, but you work every single day with your franchisees who are really feeling this pinch at the property level. How are you adjusting? How have you adjusted, and how will you adjust moving forward as we enter in a new phase? Because the last 10 years was wonderful, but it's certainly gone. Heather, I'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Chip. I don't know that it's really that much different than what Justin and Dave have said. We did the same thing. We moved to a zero-based budget model. We put it through the filter of people, process, and product, and how is that going to be impacted, and make sure that we didn't cut too close to the bone, but make sure that you deliver on the service components and those different pieces. It was an interesting process because like I think it was Justin was saying, we thought we were doing a great job, and we thought we had kind of done everything you could do in that run up 10 years to it, but we found that we can do things differently and get the same results and sometimes better results. And so we've been definitely digging into almost our DNA to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to deliver that margin to the owner at the end of the day. And frankly, in these days, help them just get through this period of time without compromising the guest experience. So a lot of the same sorts of things. I don't know that we're doing anything different from what has already been said.
Geoff, what about you?
Yeah, Dave raises a great point as this industry comes back. I mean, there's been so much flexibility that's been provided to our small business owners to help them get through that. And we know we need to continue along that path, certainly, you know, into 2022 in terms of helping them recover and return to the profitability they enjoyed pre-COVID. And there has been flexibility on brand standards, but it can't translate, to Dave's point, into service. We've seen our service scores brand by brand either hold or improve. The one thing we have not wanted to cut, we've cut certainly costs at the corporate level and done away with things that weren't necessary. But the one thing we know that is necessary are the team members out there in the field that support the small business owners and franchisees every day from a sales, a marketing, or revenue management standpoint, as we show them as much flexibility as we possibly can in terms of brand standards and operating standards.
Biran, what are you seeing amongst owners, particularly limited service hotels? How have they changed their outlook on growth? I know AAHOA members are aggressively for growth. That's how they became kind of a global power. But obviously the world's changed. So what have you seen that has changed within AAHOA and just amongst the owners that you know personally?
I think, you know, this pandemic has made everyone step their game up, right? I mean, make their operations a little bit more leaner, as kind of what Justin mentioned. I mean, as far as development, I see a lot of owners who were already in the, you know, they had already broken ground. They're continuing that development during this time where, you know, there's not much occupancy. So hopefully when we get out of this, their hotel will be built. I think that some of the owners had anticipated that there would be a lot more hotels for sale with 30-40% discounts where it hasn't been. I think that, you know, the biggest discount that people are maybe getting are maybe 10-15%. So I think that it's made everyone step their game up. I think that I've heard from some members that this has been a good time to even start building projects because from contractors, they're getting 17 to 20% reduction. And when we come out of this pandemic, they're afraid that it might come, the cost of building isn't go back up to what it was pre-COVID. So I do have a handful of owners who are deciding to be a little bit more aggressive and build at this time. But most of the owners are sitting back and just trying to stay afloat with the assets they have.
Yeah, Justin, follow up on that real quickly from an ownership standpoint. I mean, going into this, there was a lot of discussion that people with cash were going to sit there and wait and find those properties that they knew would ultimately be high performing properties that they could get at a significant discount. And, you know, Rod really talked about the fact that because of PPP and because of forbearance, what we anticipated would be just a glut of foreclosures has not actually materialized at this point. It doesn't in any way relieve the strain that people are feeling, but the foreclosures that we would have expected under normal circumstances just have not happened. Do you see owners still sitting on the sidelines, those that are in a good position saying, hey, I know there's going to be some deals out here, or are they kind of looking like, you know, maybe this is not going to happen and let's just start worrying about how we're going to start growing again?
I mean, we're seeing a mix. Right now, people are thinking a lot of different things, but in every down cycle we've been through, people have overestimated the number of distressed properties that would come to market at deep discounts. And really, in each case, we haven't seen that. I'm confident that there will be some, but in the interim, there's been some help from the government. I anticipate there will be more of that, that is specifically helping some of the smaller ownership groups that otherwise would have an incredibly difficult time making it through this. And then as we look at some of the bigger groups, we're in this together as an industry. At this point, there's very little differentiation. Everybody's suffering. And as a result, the banks are in a position where they're needing to accommodate and really provide owners with additional time. We talked about, the optimism that all of us have, things are going to get better. I think to the extent that happens, we'll come out of this and there will be more transactions that happen in the future as groups come up on refinancings, as the brands begin to put more pressure on individual ownership groups to renovate hotels where the ownership group may have depleted reserves in order to pay debt service in the short term. But over the next several months, given the optimism associated with the vaccine and the potential for travel after that, my expectation is that banks continue to accommodate, to continue to provide groups with additional room. Now, that's not to say that anybody's in a great position. Like I said before, all of us are struggling. And until business comes back, there are going to be issues for people. And I think if anything, the government help that's come so far has failed to recognize the connection between the health of ownership and management companies and the health of their employees. And there's been a reluctance, as I've interacted, and I know you've interacted with a number of people in Congress, there's been a reluctance to recognize and really to provide ownership groups with the help specifically that they need, recognizing that their health enables the continual employment of these employees. I think the government's done a great job looking at and helping employees where possible, but there's certainly more that could be done to ensure that especially these smaller owners who have less resources are able to make it to the other side of this.
You raised a lot of really good points I want to get to in just a second when we switch gears and talk about advocacy. I did want to hit on one last thing, and it was something that Dave brought up. One last thing before we get to advocacy. As we went through 2020, one of the things we recognized is that many of the leisure properties performed relatively better. And I always remind people that you need to look at this in relative terms. It doesn't mean that just because you're in a leisure market in a southern state that you're making more money than you ever made in your life. That just wasn't the case. But I think part of that is the Americans began to embrace this idea out of need and out of opportunity that you can work from anywhere. And I think if there's a lasting silver lining in what this pandemic has done to our industry, it may in fact be this idea that people are no longer tethered directly to where they live or tethered directly to whatever office building they currently work in, that in fact they can work from a hotel and experience all the things that go along with that. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on how we can continue this idea of work from anywhere. And Dave, because you made me think of it, I'll start with you.
Geoff, I think it's the discussion of the day is this work from home, and I guess maybe call me old school. I mean, we typically have about 1,000 workers in our corporate office, and we've probably got over 95% working from home. We're actually building a new headquarters. We moved into April 1st, but I will tell you, we've been trying to stay as in touch with our constituents as we can, our employees, our family, and one of the things we really find is they feel very disconnected. They miss their friends, they miss the camaraderie, they miss being part of a team. And so I would tell you that I think professions like the customer service rep, where you can measure their performance and that they're responsible to address 35 calls a day in an 8-hour shift, and that's a great work from home. It creates that work-life balance. But when I look at things like how are you going to mentor an employee from home? I just feel like, this ability to human interaction, and we've all had mentors, we've all been mentees, we've all built teams, we've worked with teams, and as I've mentioned several times on here, that human interaction, we want that one-to-one advocacy with other human beings. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago with some investment bankers, and You know, they all talked about how, you know, business travel will not be the same in the future. And I said, and they finally got to me as the lone hotel guy. And I said, you know, when everybody will start traveling is when your competitor does. And I said, if I wanted to do an IPO in 2022 and I asked you 3 banks to come in down and one of you guys wanted to do a Zoom call, you're off the list. I'm redlining you. And I just believe, I'm glad you're getting advocacy, but I think that it will be a new normal, but this whole office buildings will never be the same. I don't buy that. I come to work every day. Geoff mentioned it. I feel guilty. Number one, I don't want to work from home, and my wife probably needs a break. But I'm glad she's not listening today, Chip. But
I don't blame your wife.
the reality is that I come to work because, to Geoff's point earlier, all our frontline workers, we've got our own frontline workers in this industry that go to work every day and take care of our guests. And I just wouldn't feel right sitting home and working from home. But I could be wrong, because I've been wrong lots of times, but I think there's so many people out there that are just dying to get back to the office and interact with their coworkers.
You know, for anybody that hasn't seen it, to Dave's point, Bill Crow put out Raymond James. Did anybody see his note this week on the state of the lodging in 2021? He embedded in it, Dave, a link to, I don't know if you remember that famous United ad where the boss walks around the room and hands out airplane tickets.
I loved it.
And when they asked him where he's going, he said, we're going to go see the friend that just fired us this morning, and put everybody out on a plane.
Yeah, and Geoff, I think you're right, following up on Dave's comments. You know, sometimes we think that big changes in the world means that human nature changes with it. And human nature doesn't just change because there was a pandemic. And as humans, we're built to interact with each other. And that's not going to change. And Zoom will never supplant that. Is it a great tool? Absolutely. We're using it right now. But that doesn't mean that it's ever going to take the place of human interaction. Heather, let me come to you quickly. That term bleisure, business leisure, was something that was discussed on the fringes in our industry leading up to this. I think, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, that there's a great opportunity now to kind of change that narrative that traveling for both business and leisure at the same time, particularly when you can work from anywhere, is a real opportunity for us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, and it kind of ties to what Dave was saying, but a little bit of a different perspective on it. I think more and more people want flexibility in their workplace. I think that this pandemic gave people, forced people into that flexibility, but I also think it built trust with a lot of different people. You don't have to be in the office to do your job. In fact, you might be more productive at home doing your job. And so without a doubt, we all miss that human interaction and that ability to actually spend time with each other. And so I think the whole business leisure side of it, bleisure, is just an extension of that. And so if my family's going away on a holiday for the weekend, I can tack on the Thursday or the Tuesday and work from home, and or work from the hotel, work from wherever. And it's kind of more normal. And I think this has actually been a good thing from the pandemic, and that whole trust and the ability to be productive wherever you are. And certainly Zoom, which is, I'm with everybody. It's like, okay, not another Zoom call. But on the other hand, this is a phenomenal tool that I never really used before. And so my office, unlike Dave's, is I have 50% of my people in Canada and I have 50% of my people in the US, and they can't be in the office every week. And so this tool and this ability and kind of organizing how we actually meet and communicate, I think is actually, it's all very, very positive for our industry, which has been very, very much held down. So that's just that on that particular side of it. But I also think it just, for the business leisure side, and people particularly coming out of this, they're still going to, the demand for people to take holidays and be out and about, I think it's going to be incredible. And I think people can tie that into taking holidays at the same time and still get their work done. So to me, it's all positive. Sorry, Justin.
Oh no, I interrupted you. I apologize. I was going to add to that. People are traveling now, and interestingly, business people are traveling. They're just traveling for leisure. And while some of these major corporations have said, we're not going to allow our workers to travel until fall or late summer, their workers are traveling. They're taking trips with their families. And interestingly, I have a number of investment banker friends who live in New York or in the Northeast. When the city shut down, they put their families in a car and they went on road trips and they continued to do their work while creating these wonderful experiences for their kids who were doing remote learning. And you know, I think what we've been exposed to now are possibilities, you know, for living and for utilizing hotels and exploring the world and creating experiences for our families. We've blurred the lines in ways that I think we theorized we could in the past, but really have proven now that it's possible. But really, to the point that was made earlier by Dave, liability protection is essential. It's not in many cases that these people who work for the large companies are afraid to travel. They're doing it. It's just that you know, their employers are worried that given the inevitability that many of these people at some point will catch the virus, you know, that it could happen, heaven forbid, on a business trip, and they could be held liable, which you know, is something that we certainly need to address.
Perfect segue, Justin, because I do in our final 13 minutes here want to really focus on that advocacy part of it, because, you know, what we've seen in 2020 was an engagement from our industry with government at every level like we've never had before. And you know, in normal times, we like to keep an arm's length from government and really, frankly, worry more about what it is they're going to do to hurt us. During 2020, because the world collapsed, we needed assistance. We had to engage in ways that we've never engaged before. And then luckily, in many cases, thanks for the support for everybody that's on this call and so many of you that are watching, we've been very successful in that. We've been able to accomplish things we haven't in the past. But now we're entering into this new phase, and I think liability protection is really that key point where that we have got to, as an industry, be able to remind policymakers at every level that there really is no, as you pointed out earlier, Justin, no separation between ownership and management and employees. Because where we are today, if that business collapses, those employees don't have a job. And that's just the bottom line. We are linked like we've never been linked before. And on this issue of liability protection, it is so critical, not just to protect the business owner from what I like to term as a shakedown, but to encourage business travel, which is necessary for us to ever get back to where we were. I'm going to throw that out there and let anybody jump in on it, just how important that is.
Geoff, I'll pile in because this is something that I know all of us are passionate about. And I know it sounds like I'm blowing smoke here, but I wonder, you know, I look at my colleagues like Geoff and Justin, who I have the privilege of serving on AHLA's EC with. But, you know, I wonder if this pandemic would have hit 15 years ago in AHLA what it is today. I mean, I think we're all just blessed and thankful that, you know, your team and the extended team, to your point, all the industry leaders out there and these corporations that are raising money on behalf of, because whoever said earlier, so right, we're all in this together. And it's not just us as hoteliers. I mean, it's the cruise lines, it's the airlines, it's the Ubers and the Airbnbs and everybody else that thrives off this industry. And it's one of those things that I really want to kind of change the narrative of this release of liability to, you know, I lost a lot of respect for Jeffrey Bezos when he comes out in March of 19 and says we're suspending all meetings and travel through the end of 2021. How irresponsible is that when we didn't even understand COVID-19, what the implications were? I think, you know, whether it is or not, but it seems very self-serving that he'd like us all to stay in our living rooms and buy stuff on Amazon. You know, the irresponsibility to me was, what about all the millions of our employees that are out of work and are still out of work? And to me, the release of liability, yeah, we want to do better and profit as companies, but we want to get our employees back to work. You know, we at Aimbridge had to lay off over 40,000 people, and we've only called back about 15% of them. And, you know, these are people that, as we know, live check to check. So I'm all in, Chip, as an industry leader, to whatever we need to do as an industry to get this new Congress to realize we've got to, if you want to restore jobs in an industry that's probably been the hardest hit of any, we need this liability issue to be thrown out so we can put people back to work.
Yeah, just to give everybody an update on that real quick, where we are kind of politically. I know we don't have a lot of time to spend on it, but it's such an important issue. there are 13 states that have already passed it, and they've either done that through their legislature or through executive order. There will be another number of states that will pass it early this year. Most notably, we're excited about the opportunities in Florida and Texas. But with the two Georgia elections being won by the Democrats now controlling the U.S. Senate, the likelihood, because keep in mind, this was Senator McConnell's #1 issue, the likelihood that Congress is going to pass liability protection was reduced significantly after the Georgia elections. There's no question about that. That's not a political statement. That's just a policy fact. So here is where we are. We at AHLA continue to push at the federal level and at the state level. But the reality is Dave, as you know, and everybody knows here, is that what we really don't want, we'll take it the best we can, but what we don't want is a patchwork of different states where you got protection here, but you don't have protection there, because then you as a business owner trying to determine where people are going to travel, you don't want to have to make that based on whether they're going to a state that doesn't have protection. We need a 50-state answer to this. And it's why it's so important for all of us, everybody that's watching me right now, unify around this point and let everyone know, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, that this is really, really important for us to return to economic health.
Well said, Chip.
On that issue of advocacy, a couple of things I'm going to throw out and get your opinions on it. I know, Biran, I want to start with you. Back in, 10 years ago, there was all this talk about we need tax reform, tax reform, tax reform, tax reform. Well, back in 2017, we got tax reform. And I would argue, at least from an owner's perspective, and you guys can certainly tell me about it, it worked out pretty well. Those tax reductions and bringing down the corporate rate was very helpful. There's now the threat that will be undone. And at a time when the financial impact of the pandemic is weighing on everybody, to have this layered on top of it, massive tax increases, what would that mean from an ownership perspective? Biran, I'll start with you.
Yeah, if you asked me a couple of months ago that if the new administration were to get elected, how much would it have an impact on us? And I would say huge, and it still might, but I think that, with our dialogues with the new administration in the past couple of months, kind of educating the lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, I feel somewhat optimism that even though the new administration is not in the hotel industry, they are aware of our industry. We're in their ears on a daily basis with our government affairs team. We've had a town hall with their team to kind of educate them on our initiatives as an industry. I think from a tax perspective, we are going to take somewhat of a hit, but hopefully it's not as what is being put out there, that hopefully they consider, all angles of it.
Justin, what about you? Owner's perspective, you saw what the 17 tax cuts did to the bottom line. They were certainly helpful.
No, absolutely. And the interesting thing is, we're unique as a real estate investment trust from a tax structure, but certainly, and I think the new administration has signaled that the economy is not in good shape right now. And I think while during the campaign that there was a significant push related to taxes, it seems unlikely, or at least ill-advised for the new administration to pursue things of that sort until we're back on steady ground, from a national standpoint. I think to the point that was made earlier, there's broad recognition of, I think, in the incoming administration, as there was in the outgoing administration, of the importance of our industry, the number of people that we employ, the impact we have on national and local economies. And I think in large part, as a result of your efforts and the efforts of your incredibly capable team, that message is a great base for us to have some of these incremental conversations around how specific policies might impact what I think is broadly recognized to be something that's incredibly important for the overall economy.
Geoff, I want to go to you real quick because I know we're running out of time here, and I want everyone to take notice. On Geoff's lapel, he has shamed me again, but he has his pack pens, and he wears those pack pens religiously. And I'm not saying this just because Geoff's a dear friend, but I just don't know of another leader in our industry that has been a greater champion for everyone getting involved to help defend and promote our industry through advocacy. And so I'm just going to give you the floor on that one, Geoff, because you're so good at it. not just the PAC, but so good at talking about the importance of our industry uniting around certain ideas and policies.
Well, Chip, I think it's uniting behind you and your unbelievable team. I mean, everybody said it today. This industry association has never been in better shape, and that's thanks to the team you've assembled and folks like Brian Crawford for us on the Hill. I mean, there's really no better when it comes to telling our story, but telling our story like the story we were just talking about on tax. I mean, there is a story to tell there that you need to tell on all small business owners' behalf, and we need to follow. It gets back to the points that have been raised, that Dave raised. I mean, you think about the number of employees that Aimbridge has had to terminate or furlough or reduce their hours on. 4 million of our industry's 10 million team members are still out there on furlough. And we have been, as an industry, blessed over the last few years as we talk about this cycle in terms of how these tax cuts have helped us thrive and prosper. And to see all of that reverse now, it is all in storytelling. And there are stories that we need to tell and can be told. I don't know if anybody saw Larry Fink this morning, the CEO of Blackstone, after he reported earnings on CNBC this morning. It was one of the most refreshing things, and I was thinking about this, that I've heard. And he was asked this question about the impact to his business. He said, my business will survive if it's reversed, but the small business owners out there, if it's reversed, may not. And we know we have too many small business hotel owners that are members of AAHOA and HLA that can't right now afford to see that. And what Mr. Fink proposed was that there be lower tax rates for small business owners to stimulate and reset. But whether it's that, whether it's, we know, look, PPP is fantastic, but it came too late. People are frustrated that it came as late as it came, and it's not going to be enough. We know there is more that has to be done. We know there's more advocacy that will help our hoteliers through this, and our voices, as you educate, mean more than anything. And so all of us being able to subscribe, every one of our team members subscribe, both corporately and in our hotels to Hotels Act. And also pick up the phone. I know you've been disappointed when you've asked for help this year, late in the year. And I often put that back to small business owners that complain that not enough has been done. And you ask for our industry to make their voices heard by flooding their congressmen's offices with telephone calls. How few of us are willing to take the time to do that. And that's just unacceptable, because we are all in this together, and we all need to be picking up the phone and calling our congressmen and telling them what we think, because those phone calls, as you've been educating us, are as powerful, if not more powerful. Our voices, our small business owners, our general managers, are much more powerful than any of ours on this phone if they're talking to their local congressman.
No question about it. It's something I started talking about 10 years ago. That's adopt a politician. Everybody in our industry should know one elected official that they have a relationship with, where they can become a resource for that elected official. But to your point, Geoff, I remember, I was blessed to serve in public office for many years. It's one thing to get a bunch of emails. That certainly impacts, no question about it. But boy, if your phone's ringing off the hook, what happens is, if you're the elected official, the people on your team that have to answer those phone calls, they let you know that the phone won't stop ringing and you take notice. So to your point, it's really, really important sometimes to do it the old fashioned way, and that is to engage and let people know. We are just about out of time, but I didn't want to cut anybody short. Any closing messages that anybody in 10 seconds wants to get out there before we leave?
Chip, could you maybe let us know how you're feeling about 2021 in the future?
Well, I can't imagine a year worse than 2020, right? So I think 2021 is going to be good if we can get through these first few months. As you guys know, we are hopefully in the trough right now. We see it. We can see the light at the top of that hill, but that's a long climb up that hill. I think from now until May, it is going to be rough. I think a lot of it, Rod, goes back to the diagram that you showed earlier about the number of people who want to get vaccinated. I think I'll say this, and this is where, and I'll kind of close on this. This is what gives me hope, if we can unite as a country and set aside partisanship for a minute. I was just talking to somebody earlier today about the incredible job that the state of Florida is actually doing in distributing the vaccines, right? They're now down to giving it to everybody age 65 and above. And the reports we're getting is it's actually happening quite easily. People are able to get in and get out. And you think about the number of people age 65 and or above that live in Florida, that's a lot of people. If we can look at best practices, not just in our own industry and individual hotels, but best practices as far as public policy is concerned, and set aside whether that's coming from a red state or a blue state or a red politician or a blue politician, and really just look at what works and what doesn't, then I think we're going to get out of this a lot quicker than we think. That we won't have to wait till 2024 to be back to normal. But if the infighting continues, and if we're stuck here in DC worrying about impeachments and whose PAC is giving money to whom, and just nonsense that is of total irrelevance to the average American, then this is going to go on for a while. So it's up to us to demand it out of our elected officials to behave like adults and to help the people across America that really need the help. And so many of them are in our industry. But look, I can't say thank you enough to you guys. You're all my friends. For one, answering my call and being willing to participate in this, but far more important is the leadership you show in this industry. And I personally really appreciate it. And I know everybody watching.
I'd just like to close, Chip. I thought when Rod showed that graph on how we vaccinate 650, it's an interesting graph because you don't think there's 350, you got to get to 650. I thought where he was going was your note this morning to the industry that we should all read on Hospitality for Hope. I mean, we have a unique ability right now to be part of that solution. I mean, we have with hotels serving as vaccination centers, and it was really clear in that note how we all could participate. I mean, we have the geographic reach and the infrastructure and the footprint and the ability to help in getting Rod's graph all green. It's a great note we all should read.
That's our goal, make Rod's graph green. Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. This has been wonderful.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.